Get in the know. Non-stop Vikings talk. It's Purple Daily on Score North and ScoreNorth.com. Purple Daily, presented by Surly Brewing Company.
Purple Daily on Draft. We're coming at you on a Thursday here on this little holiday week. Miles Gorham, Tyler Forness, Declan Goff here to break things down from an NFL draft perspective. And with the Vikings kind of now inching themselves out of the playoff race, of course, 2 games to play, a lot at stake. So the playoffs are still in the future of the Vikings. But should they be looking at the other way? Should they be looking at the draft? There's still a chance here at a top 10 pick. So we're going to break this all down here on Purple Daily on Draft. Plus, we're recording this at like a little after noon Central Time, so we'll probably figure out maybe mid-episode if Jaren Hall is indeed starting against the Packers. So we'll probably cover that if that ends up happening. Regardless, we have plenty to get to here on Purple Daily on Drafts. Hit that subscribe button for daily Minnesota Vikings entertainment. Declan Goff, Tyler Forness, Miles Gorham here. All right, so boys, what should we do here? The Vikings have pushed themselves out of the playoff race. A top 10 pick is weirdly enough still very much obtainable for this team. At the same time, if they win out, and they need a little bit of help at this point, but if they win out, they could still be in the playoff picture, making the playoffs playing on Wild Card Weekend. So, Forno, I'll start with you. What do you want to see this team do? Would you rather see them get a top 10 pick? Would you rather see them sneak into the Wild Card round? Do you think this team has enough to upset somebody? I guess, what direction do you want to see the Vikings take here over the next 2 games to close out the regular season?
Well, it's a really tough conversation because obviously you want to end up with as high a pick as possible. And Odie is really frustrated with this conversation too, because it's just like, hey, we want to be in the playoffs. We want to win the division. We want to contend for a Super Bowl, but that's just not going to happen this year due to the mass multitude of injuries. Odie, you're fine, bud. You're fine. You don't need anything.
He disagrees. He thinks this team can make a run.
I want to see them be really competitive, and I want to see them also end up with a really high draft pick. I think the best case scenario is you go out there, you play really well, you play really hard, you stay competitive, and you lose both games at the last second, like in an almost heartbreaking fashion kind of thing. Like, I think that's the best result long term. But obviously, I just want to see them win. Like you want to see some of those things, and I'm going to try and control my dog so he doesn't ruin the whole episode. But you want to see him competitive. You want to see him play hard, and you want to see some growth from these guys who are going to get opportunities due to injuries. And yeah, I think that's what I really want to see. I want to see Jiren Hall get an opportunity. And if he ends up getting that starting job, which my guess it'll be Nick Mullins on a very short leash. He throws a pick or two, and then he's going to get pulled. I think that's what's going to happen. But we'll kind of find out. It's just get these guys in positions to succeed and get them playing well.
It seems like that's exactly how the Vikings play football games, though, right? Like competitive, heartbreaking loss. Not necessarily going to go into a game and to be completely blown out every single time. That's kind of been who they have been, especially under Kevin O'Connell. They continue to play one-score games. So both those things are obviously still on the table here. Miles, how about you, man? Do you think if the Vikings win out and they obviously get a little bit of help from the Seahawks and or Rams, that this team could still make some noise in the playoffs? Or would you rather see them at this point just probably get that top 10 pick?
I mean, the quarterback, we're in a quarterback controversy again. So, I mean, at that point, you're kind of looking at it as like, I think it should be Jaren Hall. And I more so think it should be Jaren Hall because I think he's basically would be playing for like the backup job next year. And I think that's a good thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think you see that across the league. There's some young rookie quarterbacks kind of playing for like the future backup role. I think Tommy DeVito, even though he just got benched, is still probably played himself into like a backup role next year. I think Tyson Bagent kind of did a similar thing in Chicago. I think Jaren Hall could do a very similar thing. I think Jaren Hall might have a little bit more upside than those other guys for obvious reasons, just based off what he can do. But we haven't seen it. And I think a 2-game sample size is a good opportunity to really like kind of give yourself a little bit more confidence into that guy going into next offseason. For this year, though, I don't see this team with all the decimated injuries like TJ Hockinson, Jordan Addison, DJ Wanham, like all players that were playing well for you and playing pivotal roles for you are all hurt. Obviously, you still have Justin Jefferson. You still have some key players not injured, but Danielle Hunter, all those guys. But you're still in a really tough situation. And I just don't see this team going out and beating some of the top teams in the league in January. Now, maybe they win a game or two, like they either beat the Packers or they could beat Detroit. Maybe Detroit's not playing for anything in week 18. But, yeah, I mean, playing competitive is always like you want your team to be competitive. But I'm kind of just at that point where I just want to see that, like, I don't want to see this team lose. I'll never actively root against this team. but I'm not going to be sitting there on Sunday night or next week being like, oh man, I hope they win this game, because I remember 2011 when they I can't remember the game. They beat Washington late in December, I think it was, and they went from pick 2 or 1 and got pick 3. Those types of scenarios where they miss out on the quarterback situations. Like, now we're not going to get a top 5 pick, but I'd rather have a top 12, top 10 pick than the pick 15, pick 14, pick 18, anywhere in those ranges. I'd rather be as close as I can to the 10 in that 10 range, so they can make an easier move, or a quarterback's easier for them to fall to. Like, I'd just rather that be the scenario, because you're not going to win anything in January. This team just isn't. There's too many injuries. I just don't think players are I think everyone looks tired. Like, everybody's just like run down. I just think there's so much exhaustion in that locker room. I think they could really just kind of use the reset this offseason, and like let guys kind of get healthy again and those things. So yeah, I'm kind of on the ship where I kind of would rather see the unfortunate situation, but them going 0-2 and having a better draft slot this time heading into the offseason.
Yeah, and Forno, do you think even with Jaren Hall maybe getting a nod here, and now with injuries to TJ Hockinson and just things piling up against them, do you feel that even if Jaren Hall was able to get in here and play a little bit, play these 2 games, that there'd be enough of a sample size to keep him around as like your primary backup, or even give enough evidence to have him be a legitimate QB1 option for you next year? I guess, how much would you factor in Jaren Hall getting playing time here, and how significant would that be to his development? And how he's viewed as a starting quarterback in 2024.
I think we also need to parse out what I view is going to probably be different from how the Vikings end up kind of moving forward here. I think unless he's just a catastrophe in one of these games that he ends up potentially playing, or if he decides to all of a sudden be one in practice, because I think that statement from Wes Phillips yesterday, where he really talked about the development and just the unknown of what Jiren Hall is and kind of that whole situation, I thought was one. I love it hearing answers like that from the coaches, because you don't get a lot of just really well thought out, articulated answers that actually have some depth to it, because you're usually just getting coaches be like, hey, like, I'm just not going to give you much. I'm going to beat around the bush. Wes Phillips is just honest. Like, Hall has done some really good things, but we don't know how he's going to handle certain situations in game because you haven't seen it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not a indoctrination on Hall is bad or saying, hey, Hall is really good. There's a level of unknown with the player who just has not gotten a lot of opportunity in the National Football League. And I thought it was really cool to hear him talk about that, because you don't get that from coaches, because they want to keep everything close to the vest. They want to keep things secretive. So that kind of honesty was really nice. I think with the emergency quarterback rule, no matter what, Jaren Hall's on this football team, unless all of a sudden he just craters and looks really, really bad, because you have Nick Mullins next year for $2.25 million. And then you have Hall on a rookie deal, and you have 2 of your quarterbacks next year. Now, who's the third going to be? Is it going to be Kirk? Is it going to be a rookie? Could it be both? And then you decide to move on from either Mullins or Jaren Hall. I want to have more information on Hall. I want to be able to see him in some of those situations. And I think, even though I thought Mullins played pretty well on Sunday, you look at the 4 interceptions. You could argue all 4 of those were good decisions, bad throws. And I like guys who make good decisions, but his arm just could not cash those checks. Why couldn't he cash those checks? Because he's just not at that level. And he's a backup. If he was at that level with his arm and he was able to cash those checks, guess what? He'd be starting in the NFL because of how he plays the game. I want to see what Hall can do, because I think he can bring a little bit of a level of less bozo, and he can add that element of the rushing attack, and he can obviously make some of these throws in structure, which is what Kevin O'Connell wants to do, having run this system in college. So I would put Hall in there because you can now make the argument, which is what we've been talking about on the show for a while. You can make the argument that he's your best bet to win. You couldn't do that before last week because of how Mullins played pretty well against the Bengals outside of a couple plays. So get him in there, see what you've got. And you know what? If he's the guy, that's great. Now you don't have to spend a high resource on a quarterback. If he's not, now you know for certain, and then you can proceed forward without having that level of unknown circling him.
All right, Miles, I'm going to put you on the spot here. If you had the option of having Kirk Cousins as a veteran quarterback back here, or if in some weird, crazy scenario, Russell Wilson is in purple, which quarterback would you take?
I missed it. It kind of blared out on me. What was who's the first veteran quarterback?
So either you get Kirk back, and
Okay.
I'll put financials maybe at like not a wash, but very comparable. Like one's not making significantly more than the other. But if you had the option to having Kirk back or you get Russell Wilson, which one would you take?
Oh, it's Kirk. Like 100 out of 100. I obviously, like, the injury does play a factor here for Kirk Cousins compared to Russell Wilson, but the way that the Vikings want to play their offense and Kevin O'Connell's offense, he'd prefer Kirk Cousins over Russell Wilson at this stage in their careers. 5 years ago, I'd take Russell Wilson, but like Russell Wilson's game doesn't age as well as Kirk Cousins because Russ needs to be a little bit more out of structure and use his legs to win a little bit more, but he's never really been that great within the pocket all the time consistently. He's been good and he's played at a high level at times, but Kirk's game is from the pocket. And I think that as you age makes things a little bit easier when your athleticism starts to deteriorate a little bit more. So I think they would choose Kirk, and I would probably choose Kirk in that situation. So, but to kind of talk about Fornos, talk about Jaren Hall, I don't think 2 games is a large enough sample size to say like he is the guy going into the offseason. And I think that in itself should never stop you. And I think what we saw this year is the more we saw backup quarterbacks play, the worse things tended to get for them. And I'm not saying Jaren Hall can't be better than a backup quarterback, but there just wouldn't be enough of a sample size for me to say I have confidence in that going into the season, offseason, like he's Desmond Ridder last year or Sam Howell or those types of guys, to say that like he should be the like starter going into to training camp into the season and that type of thing. I just don't think there's enough sample size to say that. If with 2 games, no matter how well he plays, he's like these 2 games, because we've seen that from Nick Mullins, we've seen it from more Dobbs than Mullins, but like we've seen those guys play at a high level for a small sample size and be like, okay, and that question, then that came crashing down. I'm not saying that would happen with Hall, but I just don't think you'd have enough of a sample to say that like you could go into the offseason confidently that he should be the guy.
Well, no, have you seen enough? And enough is kind of an interesting word as I say that out loud, because I thought Kevin O'Connell kind of abandoned the run on Saturday against the Lions, where Ty Chandler had a really big game against the Bengals, and then they just kind of stopped giving the ball to him. And I know that they eventually at one point they were down multiple scores, so it's hard to run the ball in those scenarios. But do you feel that Ty Chandler has done enough to be a starting running back on this team? Do you think that he could be RB1 on this team next season? Would you rather see them stick with Madison or draft someone else or sign someone else? Ty Chandler obviously had the big game against the Bengals, kind of a stagnant game obviously against the Lions, but what have you liked from Ty Chandler this season?
Look, I think when it comes to Kevin O'Connell's play calling with the run game, it wasn't working. They tried a few different ways to try and generate the run. It wasn't working. And you know what was working? Throwing the football. So he just kept doing it. And I don't really have too much of an issue with it. I know Judd wrote an article for me on Vikings where I kind of talking about Kevin O'Connell abandoning the run game. I think he could have done a little bit more to try and get the running game going. I thought they could have maybe tried to be a little more creative. At the end of the day, it wasn't working. And throwing the ball was for the most part. Now, it wasn't the most consistent. The Vikings only had 55 plays, and the Lions beat them by 19. It had 74 on the day. So obviously, you'd like to have a little bit more ball control. But if something's not working, and you know it's not working, you can't just keep doing the same thing and expect different results. So I thought they could have tried maybe a little bit different elements to try and get a spark in the running game. But in terms of Chandler, I don't think he's done enough to say, hey, he's the guy next year. I don't think what he's done precludes you from being able to upgrade at the position, because the running back position as a whole on this team is bad. Madison is not great. Ty Chandler has more potential than Madison, but is not great. Dwayne McBride, massive question mark. We have no idea if he's going to be anything at the next level, despite all the potential we saw from him at UAB. And then Myles Gaskin, he's a floater. He's a journeyman. And good core guys to have on your roster on the back end, but nothing special. And he's like, the player's expendable. I think if you find a guy that you really like, that you think can be a difference maker on the team, then you go get him. And I don't think anything Chandler's done is going to stop you from doing any of those things.
Yeah, it's a position where people obviously are trying to figure out ways to get better value. You look at Pacheco with the Chiefs, and you look at guys that aren't paying running backs. Obviously, McCaffrey could be in the MVP conversation, but that dude's such a freak of nature that he's obviously kind of the exception to the rule. So it's you'd like to see, I think, Ty Chandler just get more handoffs just because there's more explosiveness there. But at the same time, I think we've seen enough also pass blocking situations where the dude just get absolutely rocked and can't be trusted on the field every down. So there's definitely a learning curve there. What do you make here of TJ Hockenson's injury, Miles? And do you think that this is a position where you can just kind of give the ball to Josh Oliver because Hockenson's probably going to miss at least the first month of next season? Maybe there's a miraculous comeback here, but you're going to be without one of the best tight ends in football. Do you feel comfortable with Josh Oliver, like taking the next step? Is this something that you can maybe address in the draft to like kind of supplement things behind Hockenson? Because the Vikings are going to be without obviously one of their best weapons in the NFL to probably start the first month of the next season.
Well, maybe this convo can kind of segue into what we're going to talk about later about wide receiver, because I think they kind of tie into each other. Obviously, Josh Oliver is your best blocking tight end. He's like that inline Y type player, whereas Hockenson's a little bit more of that move guy. You can move him everywhere. He's an okay blocker, good blocker, but he's not anything like crazy. But that's why they brought Josh Oliver in. I think Oliver also has that athleticism to kind of be a guy that can step in and catch some passes. We've seen it. Obviously with Hockenson on the field, but I think Oliver can be kind of a solid tight end 2 type. He's a good tight end 2, right? Like, so I think him stepping into the tight end 1 role isn't like you're not like the downgrade's huge because Hockenson's that good, but I think you can still get away with Oliver being your tight end 1 and still having a productive passing offense with him in there. And I think Johnny Munt's solid too. Maybe they bring him back. I think he's had a 2-year deal last year, so I think he's a free agent. But maybe you bring him back. They seem to really like him. But I think you could get away with it because you have Justin Jefferson, you have Jordan Addison, you have a lot of weapons that can kind of help supplant some of the production from TJ Hockenson while he recovers. Now on the flip side, I think one way to help like that whole situation is by focusing on wide receiver. So I think you have Josh Oliver for another 2 years under contract. Obviously, TJ Hockenson signed long-term. Maybe you draft somebody late, but I wouldn't put any sort of significant resource into that like third/second tight end while Hockenson recovers. I'd rather focus that position on wide receiver and go get another third wide receiver because KJ Osborne is a free agent and so is Brandon Powell. And Jalen Naylor hasn't done anything this year to really show that he should step into that role. He's been unfortunately hurt, so you can't really put trust into that. So for me, I'd really focus on like a day 2 or early day 3 wide receiver in the draft, or even like a cheaper wide receiver in free agency to kind of help you supplant that situation or like, kind of remedy that situation while Hockenson recovers. Lots of guys in this draft. I think it's a really deep draft, but for me, we like to run 11 personnel a lot. So why not just kind of lead into that and let that kind of be your base again? You can kind of get back to that. Especially with Josh Oliver as your tight end 1 early in the season, he helps you stay in line and block and still help keep your run game effective because he's a good run blocking tight end without having to have 2 tight ends on the field. You could keep 3 receivers on the field. So, and then CJ Ham can help with that as well. So I think for me, I'd rather focus on a wide receiver in that case than kind of trying to go find a pinch hitting tight end or whatever, what have you. Right. So, I think you could go get another weapon at wide receiver and let that kind of help you while TJ Hockenson recovers.
So, Forno, how should the Vikings plan that attack in the draft? So, obviously, J.J. Addison, you got 1 and 2 wide receivers, and hey, the future of J.J. is a conversation in its own right. But regardless, you have 2 kind of game-changing wide receivers there. But how should the Vikings go about that? Like, if there's a top wide receiver on the board in the first round, I don't know if they'll take it, but at the same time, is a day 2 selection of a wide receiver possible here with the Vikings? How would you go about kind of replacing or adding just a new weapon in this Vikings offense in the draft next season?
The weird thing is I don't think day 1's out of the question. I don't necessarily think it'd be the smartest allocation of resources, but this wide receiver group is nuts. It's really good. And we've talked about that multiple times over the past few years. 2014 is the one I always point to. You got Stefon Diggs in round 5. And there were reasons why Diggs fell, but the main reason was because of just the sheer depth of the class. You have a guy that has a hamstring injury. You're probably not going to take the chance on him versus another guy that has a relatively clean bill of health. So you can get value later. And I think day 2 is probably the sweet spot. Maybe a trade back, recoup a 3rd round pick and take one there. There are quite a few guys I like in that like high 3rd round range. But if there's a guy that you absolutely fall in love with in round 1, like a Romo Dunze, a Malik Neighbors, and they somehow fall to you you have to at least have the conversation and think about it, because these are great football players. And all of a sudden you have a really solid offensive line, and people may like not think it. The Vikings offensive line is good now, and it's been good all season. Some of the issues that they've had have to do more with wanting to throw the ball downfield. Like Nick Mullins' average depth of target on Sunday was 16.2 yards per Pro Football Focus. I think I'm getting that correctly. That's insane how far that they're trying to throw the ball down the field. So when you have those weapons, you can do a lot of different things, but also puts more stress on the offensive line. So some things can look worse, especially with a pocket passer like Nick Mullins. Mullins and Cousins, they don't really move around a lot. But if you find a guy that you just absolutely love, and that could be a true difference maker in this offense, I'm okay going for it. It's not like the Lions were made fun of because they took a wide receiver in the first round 3 years in a row. Well, they finally hit with Megatron, and it worked out pretty well for him. Mm-hmm. But if you love a guy, take him, because wide receiver is one of the most valuable positions in the NFL. You're losing KJ Osborne. Likely you might lose Brandon Powell. Jalen Naylor's a massive unknown at this point. And you have Addison, you have Jefferson, and you have Hockinson. So all of a sudden, now you get a fourth guy. You have two wide receivers at rookie contracts that could potentially be like wide receiver one capable. How are you going to stop all of these guys? And you could have an aging Kirk Cousins at quarterback. You could have a rookie at quarterback, and their job was going to be made so much easier. Oh, breaking news, Jaren Hall's getting the start. Boom. I'm a happy guy. But it's some of those elements. You stack the deck for the quarterback, their job is so much easier, and a receiver could do that. Now, is it smarter to take one of those guys over an edge rusher, over a potential quarterback? The answer is no. But if you love the guy and he's at a valuable position like wide receiver, it's okay to take him. I'd still wait till day two. Guys like Malachi Corley, Jacob Cowing, Jamari Thrash, the Louisville guy, who that dude is fun. Those are guys I would prioritize over round one. But if you love him, take him. Draft good football players and deal with the rest later.
Miles, do you think a Jiren Hall-led Vikings team can beat the Packers on Sunday? Do you think that this could be a win for the Vikings? Obviously, they've struggled at home. The Packers have kind of flip-flopped after the Vikings got off to a nice start or a nice run there in October, November. Now, all of a sudden, they have the same record as the Packers. I mean, that's kind of just a crazy league that it's been. But do you think that Jaren Hall can do enough to lead the Vikings to a win over Green Bay at home on Sunday?
I think what we'll see is an efficient offense. I don't think the hard part is that, I mean, the Packers have really struggled, and they gave up 30 points to the Panthers last week, and the Panthers have been arguably the worst offense we've seen in a long time. And so I think Jaren Hall and Kevin O'Connell can kind of put together an effective offense against that defense. Now, what the hard part is, we don't know what Jaren Hall is going to be like in terms of like disguise coverages and how much disguise coverages and things that the Packers bring. But the one thing we do know he has Justin Jefferson, and he has a guy that we know that can bail him out of situations. The unfortunate part for Hall is he's going to be down Hockinson, he's down Addison, I'm assuming, and then he's got KJ Osborne and Brandon Powell really being the other guys. So it's tough. I was hoping to see him kind of with the full gambit, the TJ Hockenson and Addison, and kind of see how he performed with all those guys. But I still think there's a chance they could beat him. I think that if they can get the run game going a little bit more effectively, that always obviously helps running quarterbacks, especially young quarterbacks. I think if they can get the play action game going, especially in a game like this where you don't have the same type of weapons, maybe you do run a little bit more 12 personnel, a little bit more 22 personnel, just to kind of get things a little bit more easier, max protect, those types of scenarios, and kind of keep the Packers out of like nickel and dime defenses where you can hopefully get JJ into more, I doubt he'll get single covered very often on Sunday, but more double coverage and, kind of give him opportunities because he beats those all the time, move him around the formation all the time and all over. I think you can kind of scheme to help Jaren Hall as much as you can, which should in turn lead to points and kind of consistent drives. It's staying out of the third and longs and staying out of the what am I thinking of? The situations where you really oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the word. But what you don't want to be in is in 3 and outs. You don't want like staying out of 3 and outs, like continuing drives and those things. That's really important for Jaren Hall in this offense. And so, yeah, I think the biggest thing is just getting JJ like 20 targets on Sunday because, dude, like he might have to. Like I think JJ's just gonna have to put the team on his back and say like, all right, like let's win this game. And so my hope is, with Kevin O'Connell making this change now, the plan is to kind of let him like unleash it a little bit, let him go. But I think they could do it in a contained way where Jiren Hall's got a little bit more zip and a little bit more to his fastball than Nick Mullins does. But they have similar traits and styles to their game. But I think Hall might have a little bit more of the arm talent to kind of get some of those throws that Nick Mullins was missing the last couple of weeks. So my hope is we kind of see that.
All right, Fono, I know you're a big Jaren Hall fan, so maybe remind some audience members who didn't really remember our conversation going to the Falcons game or even post-draft about things that Jaren Hall does well. What does Jaren Hall do well, and where can you see that maybe translating on the field immediately on Sunday against the Packers?
The great thing about Jaren Hall is he's already run this offense, and he ran it at BYU. Obviously, you're running a college version of it, but you're running the same style of concepts. You're running play action. You're utilizing the same style of progressions. You're just spreading the field out more because college spacing rules are just different. It makes things easier for who you're going up against in the defenses. So Hall showed a little bit of that against the Falcons. He showed that the game wasn't too big for him when he had that full week of practice. He showed that he could do some of those little nuanced things. Unfortunately, we only got 2 series of it because of the concussion. Now, against this Packers defense, you're playing without Jair Alexander. Hopefully, Jordan Addison is going to play. We don't know. He's day-to-day with that ankle injury. But even without TJ Hockinson, and the one thing that intrigues me is Johnny Munt got all those snaps once Hockinson got hurt. It wasn't Josh Oliver. Johnny Munt became that pass catcher. So I'm curious if that's going to continue or if a full week of practice will get Oliver more prepared for that role. But I think that with Hall, you add an element of him being able to utilize his legs. I think they'll do a little more of the bootleg stuff with Hall than they did with Josh Dobbs because he's already ingrained in this offense, and you already saw some of that against the Atlanta Falcons. I think the big thing with Hall is, can he continue to see things fast enough in front of him? Because in the preseason, it started to show progress throughout all 3 games, but he was not seeing things fast enough. And the game was it was still a little too quick for him. But in that small sample size, he showed the ability to go through those progressions quick enough to be able to make those throws. So I want to see more growth there. I want to see him make confident decisions and utilize the arm talent he has. He has enough zip in that intermediate range, and he throws a beautiful deep ball, but he's not going to throw like that absolute missile deep ball. It's going to have a little arc to it. It's going to be not quite as bad as a Russell Wilson arc, but you kind of understand that same style of trajectory. He's just going to drop it in a bucket, and that's his bread and butter. So I'm very excited to see how he works with Justin Jefferson. I'm excited to see how he works with this offense. I wish Hockenson was there. I hope Addison is. But I have confidence that Hall will be able to do some good things on Sunday, especially against a really bad Packers defense led by Joe Barry, who I'm shocked he still has a job.
Yeah, it's been hilarious kind of watch that completely unfold for Green Bay because, yeah, he will be definitely fired by the end of the year. And I'm honestly a little disappointed that Jair is not playing because I love the rivalry that him and JJ have been brewing over the last few years, and I kind of wanted to see how that was going to play out. And I mean, the amount of smack talk that could be happening if Jaren Hall, a rookie quarterback, is leading Justin Jefferson to cook, a very hot-headed cornerback. Man, I'm disappointed that Jair's not going to play. As much as he is a difference maker for the Packers, I was hoping that I was going to be able to see another chapter in that fight. Boys, before we wrap up here, I do have a mock draft here from Yahoo Sports. So mock drafts are starting to fly in a little bit more now. We're getting closer to the end of the regular season. So in this mock draft specifically from Yahoo Sports, and I should give obviously proper credit here as the good journalist that I
Nate
should
Tice.
be, from Nate Tice. Yeah, from our guy Nate Tice, obviously the son of Vikings head coach Mike Tice. So Nate did a good little mock draft here, and he has the Vikings picking 15th in this mock draft. So he has the Vikings just out of the playoffs, but 15th spot here. And with that 15th overall selection, they take Iowa cornerback Cooper DeJean. Is it DeJean? Is that how you pronounce his last name? Did I have it right? DeJean out of Iowa. Okay. So in this mock draft timeline, Nate writes, Brian Flores returns as the Vikings defensive coordinator. DeJean is an incredible, versatile defender with outstanding athleticism. He stays in Big Ten country and joins the blitzing and shifting coverage fun. He can be a Pro Bowl player as an outside cornerback slot or at safety. So let's drop him in Flores' lava lamp scheme and let him rip it up from everywhere. How would you feel, Miles, with the Vikings taking Cooper DeJean at 15 from Iowa?
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously proven to be a dynamic player. He's kind of got that, like, he could be your punt returner, kick returner as well, which I think depending what they do with Brandon Powell, I think Brandon Powell's been a good punt returner, but I think if you could have somebody that could solidify that role for you long term, I think that's always a positive. And DeJean does that. He's also like a dynamic cornerback who creates turnovers. So I think Flores, if Flores comes back, would be able to be that defensive coordinator to put him in positions kind of like a Kyle Hamilton or, some of those guys that, like, even Josh Metellus now, where, like, you could put him all over the field and kind of play that, like, he has, like, no position. He's kind of like a positionless player. But I don't think that's a negative anymore. It used to be considered a negative where we'd call these guys, like, positionless as like, oh, they're good at all these things, but not great at anything. I just think that's over. I think, D coordinators are getting more creative. And I think DeJean kind of has that ability to do that. And so I would be curious kind of what their intentions were for him, because, like, if you lose Harrison Smith, you still have a few safeties still in the roster, but you're kind of depleted at cornerback depth. It's clear that Andrew Booth doesn't seem to be in favor with the coaches. And obviously Mekhi Blackman's hurt. That doesn't impact next year, but, like, Mekhi Blackman, Caleb Evans has been benched. So there's a lot of, like, influx at cornerback. So I can see that being a need. And DeJean kind of brings that dual type of player that that could really be utilized within Brian Flores' defense. So I'd be for it. I'm still team quarterback in the first round, but I know anything could change. But I don't think DeJean would be a bad pick by any means in the middle of the first round.
How about you, Forno? Cornerback round 1, and does DeJean fit kind of what Brian Flores would like to do here on this defense?
Let's start with the player. I think the player would be a really nice fit. He can do a lot of different things, which Josh Metellus is kind of that guy to be like that real Swiss Army knife. But DeJean can do more. He can play a true outside corner. You can play in the slot. You can play him deep. And this is going to sound weird, and I don't think it's a one-to-one comp, but this is a very similar conversation we had to when Jalen Ramsey was coming out, where you think he can be really good everywhere, but where is he best at? And I think answering that question is going to determine where he actually projects the best in the NFL. There were a lot of conversations about Ramsey playing stronger free safety and maybe playing in the slot. Like, not everybody wanted to have him as an outside corner. Now, he ultimately proved that he should have been an outside corner the whole time the second he got in the league with his performance. But these were the pre-draft discussions surrounding Ramsey. And it's the same with DeJean. Now, as far as the Vikings perspective, this would not be a very fun pick for me. I would much prefer the quarterback route, an edge rusher, an interior defensive lineman at that level than a corner. I think our corner room is objectively fine. It's not great, but there's a real potential there. And the way this defense is structured, you can get away with not having elite players. And I think one more year of Evans in the system, one more year of Booth, Blackman, Murphy, you have a solid 4. And I think that solid 4 is just fine. Like, look at the Bengals defense the last few years. They haven't had a single great cornerback. You know what they had? They had great safety, Jesse Bates. And they invested in that safety room, Daxton Hill. Like, you can go that route. Just have good cornerbacks. And that's what the Vikings have. And they can continue to grow and get better because none of them are over 25 years old. So it would be fine, I guess, to take a corner. But there are other positions of bigger needs and I think better values that they could utilize here that would much be my preference.
It really does depend on what they view, how they view guys like a Caleb Evans. Byron Murphy seems the only guy, and Mekhi Blackman seem to be the two guys that, like, they seem to have the most confidence in. And then Caleb Evans, I still view as like a guy that has a chance to stay as a starter long term. He had some hiccups. That stuff's going to happen for young guys. But that, like, third, fourth cornerback spot seems to be wide open. And Byron Murphy, long term, he's got one more year on his deal. So I know he's still young, but maybe cornerback is a bigger need than we even realize going into the offseason. It might not be, but it could be one of those situations where they don't really have like a true lockdown corner. And I think this defense could really use one. I don't even know if DeJean could be that guy, but I think his ability to kind of play everywhere gives him a lot more. That versatility is a lot more important than it used to be.
Absolutely. Hit the subscribe button. Daily Minnesota Vikings entertainment right here. Purple Daily on Draft. We typically record these on Mondays due to the Christmas and holiday schedule. We recorded this extra one on Thursday, so we'll be back normal time slot on Monday to break things down after the Vikings-Packers game. Hit the subscribe button. Daily Vikings entertainment. This is Purple Daily on Draft. Appreciate you guys listening.